You may never have thought about this, but your food selection might very well be the reason why you've nailed either nitrate or phosphate, and individually one of these is stable in your tank, but the other one is constantly rising. This really hit home for me for the very first time as I'm monitoring the tank cycle of my own tank at home. For months I've been feeding this tank, the lights are off, and presumably there isn't a whole lot of nutrient uptake from any organism in the tank other than the fish, and the input is just what I'm feeding. However, after a handful of months of feeding the tank every day, I tested the nitrate levels to be 5 parts per million, which for me is a little high, but also in a range that most people would probably be okay. But phosphate was a different story. It was 0.5, which is a level that almost everyone would find too high. However, there's a couple interesting factors here. That 5 parts per million nitrate and 0.5 parts per million phosphate just happens to match that 10-to-1 nitrate to phosphate Redfield ratio that we talked about in a previous segment. However, is that really desirable? Well, it really depends on your goal levels, specifically your nitrate levels, because what you're about to see here is the disparity of why it's so hard to maintain fairly low levels of phosphate when you really don't care about nitrate as much. For instance, apparently the food that I'm feeding maintains about a 10-to-1 ratio, meaning that if I had 1 part per million nitrate, I'd have 0.1 part per million phosphate, and largely okay for me. However, if I let the nitrate go, inevitably the phosphate's going to scale with it and outside of a range that I feel okay with. Taking an even deeper or more impactful look at this, imagine if I had selected a food that was 5-to-1 nitrate to phosphate, meaning that when I got 5 parts per million nitrate, I would have 1 part per million phosphate, which almost everyone would find ridiculously high. The inverse here is also true. Imagine if I had selected a food that was 20-to-1 nitrogen to phosphorus. That means when I hit 1 part per million nitrate, I'd actually have 0.05 parts per million phosphate, which is close to most people's goals. So here's the conundrum. Most reefers do care about maintaining fairly low levels of phosphate similar to natural seawater because it absolutely will slow down calcification and growth, probably more than you think if you let it rise above that. It also affects coloration, however, less so with nitrate. So many reefers just don't care about nitrate as much. But in this case, if you think about the food now as a ratio, if I let nitrate rise, phosphate's going to go with it. So this is why your goals and approach matter. If you're finding that either nitrate or phosphate in your tank are independently rising and the other one's okay, what you're going to have to do is play a little bit of mad scientist to get one down over the other. I'm going to have to pick a filtration method that only removes phosphate or only removes nitrate. And there are chemicals like lanthanum chloride or phosphate E or GFO that will suck out the phosphate, and probably the most popular method for that. But I'm now reacting to it. Option 2 is actually just pick the right food that matches the input from my own tank. So which food is right for you, your tank, and your goals will probably be a little bit of trial and error. It's fairly likely that many of the seafood options out there will likely follow that Redfield ratio and be somewhere close to 10-to-1 if it came out of the ocean. Not necessarily, but likely. And everything else, who knows? If the number one ingredient on it is a terrestrial animal or beef heart or corn or wheat or yeast, really it's kind of unknown and you'll just have to see. Now, it'd be nice if we could just test the food alone and figure out that ratio, but it probably won't be as helpful as you think because there's all kinds of different organisms in your tank that are uptaking nitrogen and phosphorus at different ratios. There's bacteria, there's corals, there's algae, all kinds of different things in there. And really what we're looking for here is not mad scientists again. We're just looking for trends. So I'm not looking for a weekly pulse on this, but more so like quarterly. If every quarter or month I'm finding out that I just can't keep phosphate down, I can absolutely select a food with less phosphate. Now we're perfecting stability more intelligently, rather than trying to correct for instability with filtration media after the fact. So if you see one of these elements rising and the other isn't, try something new with the inputs or the types of food selected. Now, none of the foods that I've run into have a clearly listed nitrogen to phosphorus ratio in the packaging, but what many of them do have is a percentage of protein as well as a percentage of phosphorus, which will get you fairly close so you can make an intelligent change if you want to switch. One specific note here is frozen food frequently has a lower phosphate ratio, often dramatically so. So if you're looking for less phosphate input of the tank, frozen food might be the best bet. One of the most overlooked pieces of this is our stages of the tank. How we feed, what we feed, and the right nutrient levels changes with the age of the tank. What's okay at 6 months is totally different than it is at year 2 or 3 or 6 or 7. This is probably the most important thing related to nutrients, and it's next.